Today, I want to talk about burnout. I want to talk about the moment when everything you've been holding together, your purpose, your faith, your sense of who you are, simply gives out from under you. When you find yourself on the ground and you don't know how you got there and you don't know how to get back up. I want to talk about this because the Old Testament contains one of the most honest accounts of this experience ever written. And the person it happens to is one of the most powerful figures in the entire Hebrew prophetic tradition. His name is Elijah. The story is in the first book of Kings, chapter 19, and we're going to read it today with Carl Jung. First, a little context, because Elijah's breakdown makes no sense without understanding what came just before it. Elijah is a prophet of the God of Israel during the reign of King Ahab and his wife Jezebel, one of the most dramatically wicked couples in the whole biblical narrative. Ahab has introduced the worship of Baal, the Canaanite storm god, throughout Israel. Jezebel is a Phoenician princess who has made the persecution of God's prophets a royal project. Elijah has been in hiding, sustained miraculously, fed by ravens in the wilderness, then by a widow whose oil and flour never run out. And then comes the confrontation. Elijah challenges the 450 prophets of Baal to a contest on Mount Carmel. Each side will build an altar. They will each call on their god. The prophets of Baal go first. They call and call. They dance around the altar. They cut themselves in their frenzy. Nothing happens. Elijah mocks them openly. Maybe your God is asleep, or on a journey, or relieving himself. The prophet is quite rude about it. Then Elijah rebuilds his altar, drenches it with water 3 times, and prays. And fire falls from heaven, consuming the offering, the wood, the stones, the dust, and the water in the trench. The people fall on their faces. Elijah seizes the moment and has the 450 prophets of Baal killed at the brook of Kishon. And then rain comes. The drought that has lasted 3 years breaks. Elijah runs before Ahab's chariot to the entrance of Jezreel, faster than a horse, with the power of God. This is the moment of supreme triumph. Elijah has won everything. He has called down fire. He has vindicated his God. He has turned the people back. And then in chapter 19, the very next scene, Jezebel sends him a message. She swears by her gods that by this time tomorrow she will do to him what he did to the prophets of Baal. And Elijah runs. He runs for his life. He leaves his servants at Beersheba and goes a day's journey into the wilderness alone. He sits down under a broom tree and he asks to die. It is enough, Lord. Take away my life, for I am not better than my fathers. He lies down under a tree and falls asleep. This is an extraordinary moment. The man who has just called down fire from heaven is lying in the dirt asking to die. And the question that Jung would want to sit with is what happened? Not physically. We know what happened physically, but psychologically, what is this? Jung was deeply interested in what he called the problem of inflation, the state in which the ego becomes identified with something larger than itself. When an individual identifies with an archetype, or with a great cause, or with a divine mission, they can achieve things that seem superhuman. The energy available to them is enormous, but this state is not sustainable. It cannot be maintained indefinitely because the human being is not an archetype. We are finite, we tire, and we are made of flesh. And when the inflated state collapses, when the ecstasy of the mountaintop fades and the ordinary consciousness reasserts itself, the contrast is devastating. Elijah on Mount Carmel was something close to a force of nature, channeling divine fire. Elijah under the broom tree is a tired, frightened, middle-aged man in the desert, alone, with a woman's death threat hanging over him. And the crash from one to the other is so violent that he literally cannot imagine going on. Now, Jung was careful not to pathologize this kind of experience. He did not see Elijah's collapse as a simple nervous breakdown or a failure of faith. He saw it as a necessary station, a necessary descent, because the person who has been functioning at the level of Elijah on Mount Carmel has been drawing on something other than their ordinary self. And when that energy withdraws, what is left is the real person, exhausted, depleted, mortal, scared. And it is precisely this person, this reduced and deflated and very human Elijah, that God now speaks to. Here's what happens next, and I want you to notice how God responds, because it is nothing like what you might expect. An angel touches Elijah and says, "Arise and eat." There is a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. Elijah eats, drinks, and lies down again. The angel comes a second time. "Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you." That's it. No rebuke, no theological lecture, no remonstrance for running from Jezebel when he had just stood down 450 prophets. Just eat, rest. The journey is too great for you. Elijah eats and drinks. And in the strength of that food, he walks 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God, the same mountain where Moses received the law. He goes into a cave and spends the night, and then God speaks to him. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah pours out his heart. He says, "I have been very jealous for the Lord. The children of Israel have forsaken the covenant, thrown down the altars, killed the prophets. I alone am left, and they seek my life. I alone am left." The prophet who stood against the entire establishment of his age, who called down fire, who ran faster than horses, he believes he is completely, utterly alone. God doesn't argue with him. He says, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord." And then something passes. A great wind that tears the mountains apart, an earthquake, fire, and then, and here is one of the most famous phrases in the entire Hebrew Bible, a still small voice. In the Hebrew, kol demame daka, literally the sound of thin silence. A voice of fine stillness. Some translations say a gentle whisper. Elijah hears this, and he covers his face in his cloak and goes out and stands at the entrance of the cave. Jung found this passage extraordinary, and he returned to it at various points in his work, because what is being described here is not just a story about a prophet being refreshed. It is a map of how the deepest encounters with the divine, or with what Jung would call the self, actually happen. At Carmel, Elijah encountered God in the thunder, in the spectacular, in the fire from heaven, the vindication, the triumph. And that was real, but it was only part of the story. The still small voice, the voice of thin silence, speaks to Elijah in his exhaustion, in his aloneness, in his reduced and human state. Not on the mountain top of triumph, in the mouth of a cave, in the aftermath of collapse. Jung would say, this is often how the deepest psychological and spiritual transformations begin. Not in the moments of power and certainty, but in the moments of emptiness, when all the noise of ego, of purpose, of identity have been stripped away. And what remains is very quiet and very still. And it speaks. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" It's asked twice in the story, before the wind and earthquake and fire, and after. Both times Elijah gives the same answer. "I have been very jealous for the Lord. I alone am left." And the second time, God responds not with revelation or reassurance, but with a task. "Go, anoint Hazael as king of Syria. Anoint Jehu as king of Israel. Anoint Elisha as your successor. And by the way, there are 7,000 in Israel who have not bowed to Baal. You are not alone." There is so much to say about this. But what strikes me most, from a Jungian perspective, is the rhythm of the whole passage, the swing from inflation to collapse, from triumph to despair, from fire to silence, and the way that the deepest encounter, the most intimate communication, happens at the point of greatest vulnerability. Elijah at Carmel is impressive. Elijah under the broom tree is human, and it is the human Elijah, the one who says, "It is enough, let me die," who receives the angel's touch, who is fed, who is told that the journey is too great for him. There is a tenderness in this response that I find deeply moving. God does not say you are weak. God says you are tired. Here is food. Here is water. Rest. Jungian psychology talks a great deal about the relationship between the ego, the ordinary conscious self, and what Jung calls the self, the larger, deeper center of the whole psyche. The self does not communicate in commands and conquests. It communicates often in dreams, in quiet moments, in the unexpected arrival of what is needed, in a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And the task Elijah receives at the end: anoint your successors, go back to the world, and know you are not alone. This too is Jungian in its shape. The journey inwards, the descent, the encounter with the still small voice, these are not the destination. They are the preparation. What is renewed in the wilderness goes back into the world. I think one of the reasons this story has spoken to people across the world in so many centuries is that almost everyone at some point has been Elijah under the broom tree, has done something hard, given everything they had, and then found themselves on the ground, empty, and wondering if they can go on. And what the story says, quietly, in its spare way, is stay there. Don't force it. Eat something. Rest. The angel knows where you are. The journey is too great for you to do on empty. And then, when the time comes, go and stand at the entrance of the cave and listen. Something is speaking in the silence that cannot be heard in the fire.